Welcome to the devotion. Thanks, Viv, for asking me to share with us today what I've been thinking about and what I've been challenged by over the past couple of weeks. So what I want to do is over the next, few minutes, is to share with you guys what I've been thinking about while reading this book, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. I've never really been that interested in the early church. I like history, but just never got into the early church. I kind of just happened to start reading this book. It's turned out to be really good, and it's really captivated my thoughts about how the early church lived and how they made the gospel look so attractive. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to ask the question, how do we at North Epping in 2020 make the gospel look attractive? And I think, and what this book argues, is that it's through consistent, authentic living. And so I just want to read a quote from this book, from a 2nd century Christian writer called Justin, which is kind of weird. I didn't know Justin was such an old name. But this is what he writes. Many non-believers have turned to belief by observing the consistent lives of their Christian neighbours. And so from that, we see that consistency was one of the things that drew people into the church. Looking at the Christian's life and seeing that they preached a new kind of truth and way of living, but they actually lived it out as well. Also in this book, it says that when Christians offered the world not just theological statements, but embodied virtue, when they backed up their assertions not only in words, but also in examples drawn from reality, they attracted people who felt an irresistible pull to join them in their faith. And so I think, upon reflection, we spend a lot of time talking as Christians. We make some bold statements, some bold claims. I think sometimes we can become a bit immune to the things that we're saying and the gravity of what we're saying. We say things like we were once dead but now alive, that the church is a family of believers, that it is one of the most important commandments is to love your neighbour as yourself, and that there is actually a judgment day when those who know Jesus will be taken to heaven, or heaven will come down, and if you don't know Jesus, you'll go to hell. These statements, these bold claims that we are so confident in, and we hold to be so true. We are so good at backing it up with Bible verses, understanding the theology behind it or how it all kind of relates. And we spend a lot of our time at night church and at youth group. That is what we teach, the truth of the Bible. And that is really important. But I think it's also worth asking ourselves, does my life reflect these truths? Because I'm convinced that the non-believer will and has already seen the church at times when we've said things such as what I just said before, and yet lived an entirely different reality. When there's a disconnect, when there's an inconsistency. So when we were once dead but now alive, and yet what they see is the same Nathan living the exact style of living, the same way of living. We say that we are a family of believers, but maybe the outsider doesn't see us having each other over for meals. Maybe they hear us gossiping or slandering other Christian brothers and sisters. This list could go on and on and on. What Sam Chan argues in this book, Evangelism in a Skeptic World, Sam Chan argues that in this postmodern world that we find ourselves in, speech and facts and history, truth, doesn't hold the same weight as it once did. These things are now seen as relative. And so the outsider doesn't just want another truth, but rather they want a truth that works. They want a story that can be seen, a gospel that is real. And so let me read just a few parts of this book that really makes a convincing argument of why we need to be living consistent lives. Authenticity. The buzzword for postmoderns is authenticity. Unlike moderns, the first question is not, is it true? But is it real in our lives? Are we living consistently, or better, coherently with our beliefs? Are we being told to are we being true to ourselves? Do we walk the walk as well as we talk the talk? This should lead us to think about how we evangelize to our postmodern friends in a way that communicates authenticity. While the gospel is something we speak, words that communicate God's truth, there's also a sense in which we ourselves are a component of how the message is communicated. We speak the words of truth, but we speak the truth in love. Ephesians chapter 4 verse 15. Our message is embodied. It doesn't come in a vacuum. It comes in the context of shared lives and trusted friendships. This is the model of evangelism that Paul himself uses with the Thessalonians. Our gospel came to you not simply with words, but also with power, with the Holy Spirit and deep conviction. You know how we lived among you for your sake. The Thessalonians don't just believe the gospel to be true, but also see that it is real by Paul's authentic living. And then another quote from this book talks about the importance of authentic living going hand in hand with being hospitable. So hospitality is also a powerful apologetic tool. Often we have to defend questions such as why are Christians hypocritical? Or why are Christians homophobic? We can give good explanations for why Christians are or are not hypocritical. And we try to give good examples for why Christians are not homophobic. But more often than not, our friends aren't listening to us. They're not listening to our answers because their minds are already made up. But if we have them over to our homes, it is then hard for them to accuse Christians of being hypocritical when they're enjoying a meal with us. And if we're inviting our gay friends for dinner, then it is hard for them to argue that we're homophobic. We're obviously not homophobic if we're opening our homes to the LGBT community for a meal. And then just the last quote that I want to share, it's more Sam Chan kind of exploring the logic behind the difference of what we have done and what we should start doing. And so in the past, we used to employ this logic that the gospel is true. And if it's true, you must believe it. And if you believe it, now go and live it. But with postmoderns, a better sequence is the Christian life is livable, as you can see from my life. And if it's livable, then it's also believable. And if it's believable, then it's also true. I think it's a really clever way of thinking about evangelism to the non-Christian, about making the gospel look attractive, not just in words, not just in theology and statements, but a lived out theology, a lived out expression of what we know to be true. And so just to finish, the question that I asked at the beginning, how do we make the gospel look attractive? And asking ourselves, does my life reflect the truths I know to be true. Hopefully that was helpful, encouraging, thought-provoking, and I'd love to talk with you more about it. So if you ever have any questions or thoughts on it, I would love to hear and listen to you. Thank you.